The grand hall of the Empress shimmered with lights that were almost alive. Crystalline panels lined the walls, catching the colors of the twin suns outside and scattering them across the room like liquid rainbows. The floor was smooth, reflective, and cold underfoot, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and something else the human soldier could not name. It was a smell both ancient and new, a scent that belonged to a place older than most planets he had seen. The hall should have been full, buzzing with the movement of guards, courtiers, and emissaries. Instead, there was silence, deep, unnatural silence that seemed to hum just beyond hearing. The human soldier stood near the edge of the room, his boots making soft echoes against the polished floor. He had been assigned to the Empress as a cultural liaison, a bridge between the human delegation and the Galactic court. His role was supposed to be ceremonial, nod, smile, stand at attention, and represent the human worlds with dignity. But dignity felt like the smallest concern now. Every being in the hall had already fled, not through doors or corridors, but seemingly into themselves, dissolving in the presence of something unseen. The human had seen fear before, even terror, but what he was facing now was different. It was a fear that twisted space and sound, bending reality around it. He did not know what it was, could not name it, could not measure it. And yet it was there, pressing on every mind in the room like invisible hands. The Empress, regal and poised, did not move. She had expected to command, to project strength that could bend others to her will. But even she now seemed fragile, suspended in the air of a force she could not control. "Sir," she said finally, her voice small against the quiet. She did not glance at him, but he knew she was speaking to him. You are not afraid." He was aware of his heartbeat, steady but loud, of the tension in his muscles, of the very reality around him seeming to wobble like a reflection in water. He felt a strange thrill in that awareness, a sense of being part of something enormous, something that no one had understood. The Empress's eyes, dark and deep, turned toward him. She studied him for a long time, as if measuring whether he would break, whether he would run like everyone else. She had never seen humans this way. On their homeworlds, they had survived storms, collapsed economies, wars that had threatened to erase entire continents. They had been creatures of chance, forced to adapt to environments no one else could endure. And yet here in the heart of a hall that was supposed to belong to her alone, one human soldier stood while all others fled. Why do you remain?" she asked, almost whispering. It was not a question of loyalty or duty. It was a question of comprehension. He paused, searching for the words. "I think it is what we are used to, standing even when nothing makes sense. We are trained by life itself to not move until we understand the ground beneath us." He felt foolish saying it aloud, but the words carried weight in the empty space. The Empress blinked slowly, as though trying to see the reasoning in his explanation, trying to feel it in herself. The pressure in the room seemed to shift. The other guards, the counselors, the brilliant minds of the galaxy who had fled only moments ago, were now only echoes in the human's mind. Their panic, their incomprehension, their flight, it was like watching the flow of water while standing on a stone that did not move. He realized that he could feel them not physically but as shadows of thought, shadows of panic that pulled at the edges of his consciousness. And yet he did not yield. The Empress stepped closer, her robes floating slightly as if gravity had less power over her than it did elsewhere. Her presence was commanding, yet now tinged with uncertainty. "It is rare," she said, almost to herself, "to see a being untouched by the fear that consumes others." Not because the force could not harm him, but because he had learned to accept the unknown, to move when nothing seemed certain. Humanity, he realized, had survived countless times in conditions far harsher than any galactic court could produce. Starvation, collapse, endless storms, rival tribes, they had all been teachers, and humans had learned to endure without waiting for guarantees. "You," the Empress said again, her voice trembling slightly, "you do not even try to resist." The pressure that had made the air shimmer began to recede just slightly, as if acknowledging his calm, his attention, his refusal to run. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The Empress watched the human soldier, and he watched her, and together they occupied the hall with a quiet understanding. Around them, the echoes of panic lingered like smoke, and the hall itself seemed to sigh as the invisible force held back. "You have changed nothing," she said finally, though there was awe in her voice. "Yet the others, they are no longer bound to their fear." "I do not know if I changed anything. Maybe just made a space for reality to catch its breath." They did not rely on fear to guide them, nor did they flee from the incomprehensible. They stood, they endured, they adapted. They carried within them a strength that could anchor worlds, that could hold space steady when all else fell apart. The hall was still. The force that had made everyone else flee did not vanish, but it paused, refrained from pressing further. The soldier could feel it moving around him, probing, learning, perhaps even curious. He had no weapons, no armor capable of defending against the impossible, and yet he stood. His presence alone seemed to remind the universe that some beings did not run from the unknown. "You may not understand it," the Empress said softly. "But you have done what none of my guards, my counselors, or even my generals could do. You protected me." Outside the hall, the twin suns shone as if nothing had happened. Inside, reality was still delicate, uncertain, but slightly steadier. The human soldier looked around and took a deep breath, aware that he had become the axis around which the impossible seemed to turn. And somehow that awareness did not scare him. It made him feel alive. The Empress did not move, but her eyes softened. She had seen something she could not command, could not buy, could not create. She had seen a human stand in the face of the unknown and remain unshaken. And in that act, the galaxy itself seemed just a little less frightening. The human soldier adjusted his stance, feeling the cool floor beneath him, hearing the faint hum that seemed to pulse through the walls. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know if the force would return, stronger or weaker, if the council would return, if the universe would continue its endless motion. But he did know one thing: he would stand. And sometimes, he thought, standing was all a human needed to do to make a difference. And so he remained, silent and steady, the only figure in the hall who did not flee, who did not break, who did not look away. All others had run, but he, human, ordinary in every sense but the one that mattered, had risen between the Empress and the unknown. And in that rising, the first seed of change had been planted. The hall remained quiet long after the first wave of the force had passed. The human soldier still stood where he had, unwavering, while the Empress slowly stepped back to the center of the room. She moved with caution, each footfall measured, as if touching the floor might summon the invisible presence back. She could feel it lingering at the edges of her senses, a subtle tension in the air that suggested it had not left but was waiting, watching, learning. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly, almost as if speaking aloud might summon the danger back. Her voice held awe and curiosity in equal measure. The soldier glanced at her and shook his head. "I feel something," he said slowly, "but it doesn't frighten me. It's like standing in a storm you've known all your life. You can't stop the wind, but you can brace yourself and let it pass around you." They couldn't stay. Why? There was a strange clarity in his simplicity, a truth that seemed to ripple through the hall. Around them, the light from the crystalline walls shimmered more faintly, as if acknowledging the calm that had returned. "The phenomenon," she said, finally naming what had terrified everyone else. "It was supposed to be impossible. Even my advisors, none could predict it. It bends reality itself, reshapes thought, breaks minds. Yet you were not broken. Maybe we know the world can twist in ways we don't expect, and we still have to keep moving." She had seen fleets and armies tremble at the unknown, entire species falter in the face of cosmic anomalies, and yet one human soldier stood as though nothing could shake him. "You have done more than any of my guardians or generals could do," she said softly, her voice carrying awe. "Not through power, not through technology, not even through loyalty, but through presence." "How is that possible?" It did not break him, nor did it overwhelm him. In a strange way, it seemed to recognize something in his mind it had not seen before, a mind that did not resist, did not flee, and yet did not collapse. "You do not even try to control it," the Empress said finally. "Most would either attack or flee, but you let it exist. And somehow you anchor it. You survive not by domination, but by endurance. You are anchors wherever others fail." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, and yet it carried across the hall with weight. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with praise, but aware that words alone could not convey what had just occurred. He looked at the crystalline walls, at the faint shimmer of light that seemed alive, and realized that the phenomenon had not left entirely. It lingered, but it no longer pressed. It was as if it had recognized him, understood him, and chosen not to act against him. "Why are you here, human?" the Empress asked suddenly. "Not just standing, but here where no one else could remain." "Why?" Yet this human stood before her, and power seemed meaningless compared to what he had shown. She realized that she could command armies, influence entire worlds, and yet none of that could replicate the strength of one human simply standing when everything else fled. Around them, the hall was still. The phenomenon had receded enough that the echoes of panic in the other beings' minds were faint, like distant thunder after a storm. The Empress sensed that her advisors would return soon, expecting explanations, expecting her to wield her authority and declare victory or blame. But she also knew that the human soldier had changed the meaning of the hall, changed the moment, and perhaps changed something fundamental about how the galaxy might perceive humanity. "You have done what none of my armies could," she said again, "and yet you claim it was nothing. Maybe staying is what humans do best." She realized that the strength of humans was not in their weapons, their numbers, or their strategies, but in their minds, their endurance, and their ability to persist when everything else faltered. The soldier noticed her gaze and felt a small warmth of pride, though he did not speak it. Pride was not important. Awareness was, standing was, that had been enough. Outside the hall, the suns continued their slow arc across the sky, indifferent to the tension within. Inside, the human soldier and the Empress stood quietly, witnesses to a truth that no fleet, no army, no weapon could express. Humans had a strength that others did not understand, a quiet, steady strength that could hold space, time, and even minds together when everything else faltered. "You may not understand it fully," the Empress said after a pause, "but you have taught me something I did not know. Humanity is not like the others. You do not flee, you do not collapse, you endure, you anchor. That is all I know how to do. Perhaps, in time, you will change the view of the galaxy as well." The soldier felt no triumph, no victory, only a steady certainty that he had done what was necessary. Standing, witnessing, being present. That had been enough to hold the unknown at bay, to stabilize what others could not. And in that quiet, the Empress saw something she had never seen before, the simple, enduring truth of humanity. They did not always triumph through power. They did not always conquer through force. But they endured. They stood. They faced the impossible and remained unshaken, unyielding, and alive. The human soldier looked around the hall one more time. He did not know what the next moments would bring, whether the phenomenon would return, whether others would understand, or whether he would even survive what lay ahead. But he did know one thing: he would stand. And sometimes standing, simply quietly, without fear, was enough to change everything. And so the human soldier remained, anchored, steady, ordinary in every way but one. He had risen between the Empress and the unknown, and in that simple act he had begun a story that would ripple across the galaxy, teaching beings everywhere that when all others ran, humans stood. The hall seemed quieter than ever. The Empress and the human soldier remained, the silence stretched between them like a fragile bridge. Outside, the suns were moving slowly, painting the crystalline walls with light that flickered and shimmered. But inside, the air was heavy, waiting. Neither of them moved for long moments, simply observing, listening to the faint hum that had not left since the phenomenon first appeared. It was a sound that belonged neither to machines nor to living beings, but to the space between them, a subtle vibration like the heartbeat of the universe itself. The Empress finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It has not gone. I can feel it at the edges of the hall. It is curious, it watches, it tests. But it is not attacking either. Some things are not meant to be fought. Some things are meant to be understood, even if just a little. That can change how it moves, how it reacts. Some forces are not defeated by strength. They respond to calm, to attention, to endurance." He was a center of quiet that bent the world around him without touching it. "I do not understand it," she admitted, voice low, "but I see it in you. You anchor what others cannot. Not to run, and yet all others fled. Sometimes staying is the only choice that matters." It had broken others, it had driven the strongest to collapse, yet here he stood, unmoving, present, calm. The Empress studied him, then slowly walked closer. "Do you feel it?" she asked. "What does it want?" "That is all it has." She had faced cosmic phenomena before, but they were always calculable, predictable, bounded. This was different. It was alive in a way she could not measure, responding not to strategy or weapons, but to attention, to calm, to the simple act of standing. "You have survived it without even trying," she said finally. "And yet, I feel it around you. It lingers, waiting. It will test again, it always does, and I will stand. That is what I can do. We endure when the world falls apart around us. Sometimes that is enough. Being here, you do not fear it," the Empress said quietly, "and that is what makes you unbreakable." Her empire had faced countless dangers, threats, and disasters, and yet none had prepared her for the quiet power of one human standing in the presence of the unknown. She realized that strength, as she had always measured it, was not the ability to crush or destroy. Strength could be patience, endurance, awareness. Strength could be stillness. "You have taught me something," she said softly. "I thought I knew what strength was, but you have shown me it is something else entirely. Something I cannot command, cannot build, cannot control. Something I can only witness. Perhaps you will change the view of the galaxy as well." He realized that the universe had ways of testing beings that no one could predict, and that sometimes the test was not about strength, speed, or intelligence. It was about presence, calm, endurance. The Empress watched him, noticing how he observed without panic, how he acknowledged without resistance. She had never seen such control, such clarity. Most beings would have screamed, collapsed, or run. Most beings would have sought a weapon, a shield, a way to dominate. But this human, he stood. "You have changed how I see my world," she said again. "How I see the stars, how I see life itself. Your kind endures where others fail. You anchor, you stand when all others flee. Because fleeing changes nothing. Because being present, sometimes it is the only thing that matters. It is about surviving, enduring, standing even when there is nothing to hold on to. That is enough." "You have done what no one else could," the Empress said softly. "Not through weapons, not through fleets, not through intelligence, but through simply being. And that is a kind of power I have never known. And that seems to be enough." And so the human soldier remained, steady and calm, a single presence in the vast, shimmering hall. The phenomenon lingered, watching, learning, but no longer threatening. And the Empress, ruler of 1,000 worlds, began to understand the truth of what humans could offer the galaxy: endurance, calm, presence, and the courage to stand when all others ran. The hall held its breath, and in that stillness, the human soldier and the Empress shared an understanding that words could never fully capture. They shared a truth that would ripple beyond this hall, beyond this world, and perhaps, one day, across the stars. And the human soldier, he simply stood. The phenomenon no longer pulsed only at the edges of the hall. Its presence grew stronger, more deliberate, yet somehow less threatening. It was as if it had recognized the human soldier, noted his calm, and now sought to communicate, not with words, but through sensation, through the very fabric of reality. The Empress observed it with awe, feeling the shifting energy ripple through the crystalline panels and across the reflective floor. She had never felt such power respond to subtlety, to patience, to quiet presence rather than force or command. "You can feel it differently now," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "It is changing. I simply notice. Influence without touching, without action. That is a kind of power I do not understand." The phenomenon seemed to reach toward them, brushing at the edges of thought, testing understanding, gauging presence. The human soldier felt its probing, sensed it not as threat, but as inquiry, and he did not flinch. He did not retreat. He did not turn away. He simply stood and observed, breathing calmly, letting the vast unknown move around him without shaking his focus. The Empress could not take her eyes off him. She had always believed in preparation, in command, in mastery over circumstance. But here, nothing she had learned mattered. She could not command the phenomenon. She could not control it with fleets, with shields, with strategy or diplomacy. All she could do was witness the human soldier, and through his presence she saw a new kind of strength. "What you do, it is not ordinary," she said finally. "None of my advisors, none of my generals, none of my finest minds could have remained calm. Yet you teach it something by standing. I only know that I survive by observing, by noticing, by being present." He only felt the weight of what had been asked of him, simply to remain standing while the universe tested everything around him. He understood that his role here was not to conquer or dominate, but to endure, to witness, and to let the phenomenon see that not all beings were controlled by fear. "It does not attack," he said softly, sensing the change in the energy. "It reacts, it tests. It learns, that is enough for now. I cannot control it, but I can stand while it moves. That is all anyone can do. You simply endure. That is enough." "You are teaching it without trying," she said, voice barely audible. "Your endurance, your presence, they are shaping it. Not because of strength or skill, but because of endurance, presence, and the willingness to face the unknown." It had found something steady, something constant, and it had paused, curious rather than hostile. And in that pause, the Empress began to see what he had been teaching without words. "You have changed my view of humans," she said. "I believed strength came from control, from command, from power, but you show me another way. Endurance, calm, presence, these are strengths I cannot create. I can only witness them. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of the unknown. I have lived through storms that seemed impossible. This is another kind of storm. It does not change the way I face it. Standing is what matters. Fear cannot control me if I do not let it. Fear had always been something to manage, to conquer, to overcome. But here, the human soldier did not fight fear, did not flee from it. He simply existed within it, steady and unshaken. "You have endured where others would have collapsed," she said. "You have faced the incomprehensible and remained. That is power beyond anything I have known." "I do not know about power. I only know that standing, noticing, enduring, that is how humans survive." The Empress observed, fascinated. She realized that this was a new form of interaction, a new way to influence the universe without force, without weapons, without command. The human's calm had become a bridge, a connection between the incomprehensible force and the living beings in the hall. "You do not fight it," she said finally, "and yet you shape it." "I only stand, but standing can be enough. Sometimes it is all anyone can do." "I only do what I must. I stand, I endure, I notice. That is all I know how to do." It had learned in some strange way that he would not flee, would not collapse, and that presence could hold the unknown at bay. "You have changed the way I see the universe," the Empress said softly. "You have taught me that strength is not always in action, not always in power, not always in control. Sometimes it is in standing, enduring, and witnessing. You are extraordinary." He had shown her a new kind of strength, a new way to interact with the unknown, a new path for life in a universe too vast to control. And so the human soldier remained, steadfast and calm, the anchor in a hall of shifting energy. The Empress watched him, learning, understanding, and beginning to see a future shaped not by force, but by endurance, presence, and the quiet courage to stand when all others ran. The phenomenon had shifted once again. It moved with more intention now, flowing through the hall like liquid light, brushing at the crystalline walls and pooling near the human soldier and the Empress. Its curiosity was no longer subtle. It probed with confidence, as if it had recognized a new order in the world, a stability it had never encountered before. The Empress watched closely, feeling a tension that was no longer fear but anticipation, as if the universe itself were leaning toward something unknown. "You can feel it fully now," the Empress said softly, her eyes wide with understanding. "It reacts differently. It waits for something, it watches. And yet you have not moved, you have not commanded, you have not forced it to obey. You have only endured. Your species is remarkable. You stand where all others fall. You do what others cannot even imagine. Sometimes that is all that matters." It was learning from them, learning from the human soldier's calm, his presence, his endurance. And she understood something profound. This force, capable of unmaking minds, was being shaped not by commands, by technology, or by power, but by human resilience. "You do not fear it," she said finally. "And that is why it listens to you in a way." Here was a human, ordinary in appearance, unarmed, unarmored, yet standing at the heart of something no one else could face. He had done what her greatest generals, her advisors, and her fleets could not. He had endured the impossible, and in doing so, he had changed the dynamic of the entire hall. "You anchor it," she said softly, almost to herself. "You have created a point of stability where there was none. You have held the universe at bay with nothing but presence." She realized that what the human soldier had done was not just personal survival. It had altered the behavior of a force beyond comprehension. The galaxy, she thought, had underestimated humans. They had assumed that strength came from weapons, strategy, or fleets. But now she saw that endurance, presence, and courage to stand in the face of the unknown were strengths no one else could match. "You have shown me a new kind of strength," she said, her voice low and reverent. "Not domination, not force, but endurance, presence, calm. Your species is extraordinary. That is what humans do. Sometimes standing is all that is required to create change. Perhaps you do not see it now, but the impact of your presence will echo far beyond this hall. Other beings will notice. Other worlds will learn that humans endure, that humans stand when all others run. That is a legacy." He had never considered the galaxy or legacy. He had only considered survival, endurance, and presence. And yet, he now realized that standing in the face of the impossible had consequences far beyond himself. The Empress's eyes reflected the shifting light, the energy that pulsed through the hall, and something new took root in both of them. a recognition of humanity's subtle but undeniable power. The phenomenon pulsed again, more pronounced now, as if acknowledging the truth of their presence. It moved around them in fluid arcs of light, brushing near the Empress, then near the human soldier, probing, observing, yet never striking. It had learned the value of endurance. It had learned that some beings could face the incomprehensible without breaking. And in that learning, the hall itself seemed to stabilize, the energy settling into a rhythm that was neither threatening nor hostile, but alive. "You have changed the way I understand life," the Empress said softly. "I believed strength came from command, from fleets, from domination. But you have shown me that there is another way. A way to shape reality without force, to influence without touching, to endure without fleeing. You are extraordinary." The Empress could see the patterns of light shifting in ways she had never imagined, flowing around the soldier's presence and reflecting across the hall. It was as if the universe itself had recognized the human soldier, acknowledged his endurance, and adapted to it. "You are a teacher, though you may not know it," she said. "Not in words or plans, but in action, in presence, in endurance. You have taught me something that no book, no army, no advisor could. You have taught me humanity." The Empress had learned from him, the phenomenon had learned from him, and perhaps one day the galaxy itself would learn from him too. "You have shown me a new way to see the universe," she said. "I will not forget it. I will not forget you." "That is enough." The phenomenon pulsed one last time, brighter than before, then receded slightly, as if satisfied. The hall was calm, the air steady, and the Empress could feel that the energy had shifted permanently. It would never be the same. She would never be the same. And humanity, she thought, would never be underestimated again. "You will be remembered," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not for force, not for fleets, not for conquest, but for endurance, calm, presence, and courage to stand when all others run. That is all any human can do." He had acted because standing was necessary, because endurance was the way he survived, because presence could shape even the incomprehensible. And now, in the stillness of the hall, he understood that standing could indeed ripple outward, shaping lives, worlds, and perhaps even the stars themselves. The Empress watched him one last time, seeing clearly what she had learned. That strength is not always in power, not always in domination, not always in speed or intelligence. Sometimes, strength is in enduring, in witnessing, in being present when the universe tests everything around you. And humans could endure in ways no one else could. The human soldier remained, steadfast and calm, a single presence in the hall of shifting energy. The phenomenon, once terrifying and incomprehensible, now flowed around him with curiosity and respect. And the Empress, ruler of countless worlds, had learned something she would carry forever, that when all others ran, humans stood. And in standing, humans did not merely survive, they changed the universe.